Hello and welcome to today's episode of the GTM Playroom. Today I'm joined by Mark Osborne. Mark, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Ben. I've been looking forward to our conversation.
Brilliant. Mark, for those of you who don't know, is the founder of Modern Revenue Strategies, the host of the B2B Growth Blueprint, and author of Are Your Leads Killing Your Business? Very interesting topic, which we'll get into. There it is, the famous book. Mark is a fractional CRO, helping B2B SaaS, tech, and services founders build revenue systems that attract buyers, accelerate deals, and ultimately create enterprise value and grow the business. Mark, so a really, really interesting background you've got. Would love to understand before we kind of get into the kind of growth bottlenecks blocking businesses and kind of lead generation, which we'll get into later on. What was your main motivation for becoming a fractional sales leader?
Yeah, and it actually kind of comes back to the book a little bit, was that, I had been blessed to work with, two people in a garage startups and multi-billion, multinational, corporations, Nike, Hulu, General Motors, and really spanning everything from brand strategy and sort of category design all the way to running 8, 9 figure sales teams spread all around the country. And what I saw as I was, sort of meeting entrepreneurs and folks that I had met through business school that I just sort of was working with, was that they had a little bit of a wrong-headed approach to their marketing and sales. And specifically, they were always sort of obsessed with, I just need more leads. If I had more leads, I'd be able to, double my business. And what I realized was that really they needed to value those leads more richly, do a better job of attracting the quality of leads that they really wanted, and then to build better recurring and expansion revenue systems. And that's what companies that were really getting that hockey stick growth that everyone was chasing were really doing. And the other thing I realized too was that so many companies were getting distracted by shiny objects. And I'm a big believer in new technology. In fact, Ad Age magazine named me a marketing technology trailblazer back in 2017. And in 2014, I was giving guest lectures at UCLA on AI and marketing. So I'm a big believer in an early adopter. But what I saw was that companies were getting distracted by the shiny object and not building systems and then enhancing those systems with technology. And so it's those two things of helping them understand the sort of the strategic framework that they need to build, and then the systems that can help them accomplish those strategic objectives, and then come in and layer in the technology. It's that mission that I'm really sort of drawn to, and also, unfortunately, good ideas don't sell themselves. And so I've seen so many entrepreneurs and founders that have great ideas, and maybe they come from a more technical background, and I feel really sort of blessed to help them shine the light that those ideas deserve, and help them achieve the success that they deserve.
Really interesting. This idea of taking the sales strategy, connecting it through to the systems and the kind of operations as well. Can you walk us just to give us some flavor and an example? Can you just walk us through? You don't need to get into the client names if you don't want to, but give us an example of a type of client that you work with. What was the kind of strategy you set in? What were the systems you put in place, and what was the kind of outcome off the back of that?
Sure. So I was working with an ad tech company that was a SaaS, but really sort of a tech-enabled service. And they had started to get some traction in the marketplace, but their competitive set was much better funded through VC and private equity. And so they really couldn't sort of use the usual levers and have any share of voice because their competitors were buying out all the conferences, buying out all the ad space, giving away free engagements to sort of top tier customers so they could then use those logos. So they were really sort of struggling because they were bootstrapped. And so what we did from a strategic perspective was we looked at the marketplace and found how we could redraw the boundaries of the marketplace and really create a category where we could be number one. And so by identifying that then gave us that strategic approach. And then instead of relying on one single tactic like cold email or SDRs calling, or trying to show up at specific events and make an impact. Instead of relying on one thing and thinking that was going to be the thing, we built a comprehensive process that identified those dream clients within that new category we had created, had a coordinated physical mailing. We actually baked custom cakes with the logos of those companies on them, sent them to that, coordinated with a press release talking about how we were releasing new features specifically designed to help those types of companies, combined with an integrated LinkedIn, email, and phone call outreach sequence that allowed us to double our revenues in less than 90 days with no additional spend. So rather than just chasing their competitors on trying to do the same things they were doing and without a strategy that was really differentiating, we created a strategic approach to the marketplace. We then built a process that we could deliver against, and then we activated against that. And today, if we were doing that, we would have enabled that with a lot of AI and other tech that would have allowed it to go further, stronger, faster, better. But at the time, it was more about kind of leveraging the technology that existed.
No, interesting. And when you're kind of working with these businesses, is there a standard framework that you use that's sort of plug and play that works pretty much all the time? Or how much kind of customization do you deliver for every specific client that you're working with?
Yeah, so I talk about this a little bit in the book, and you hit on it a little bit in my intro, which is we see that there are three interlocking revenue systems. There's attraction systems, so attracting more of the right prospects. And this tends to be focused on sort of the strategy of your positioning and category design so that you can then take that out to the marketplace. There's acceleration systems, accelerating your best opportunities through the sales pipeline. And this tends to be focused on kind of traditional sales process and those things, getting to that first sale. And then there's activation systems, or activating existing clients for faster renewals, larger upsells, more referrals and testimonials, really advocacy in the marketplace. And that's really how do you grow your existing clients to be real advocates and evangelists for you, not only through retaining them and not churning, but actually having a strategic plan for growth. And so we have a diagnostic that we use that scores folks against all three of those areas, because we're big believers that you could do any of them in a silo, but they'll never be as good as when it's done as part of a holistic system. And so we will do that diagnostic to find where is the most gaping chest wound, to use a graphic illustration. But there also are strategic priorities that the company has. Maybe they've got some initiative coming out in 6 months that they need to sort of prepare for, or there's some other risk factor related to their existing customers that we need to sort of be aware of. So we take the results of that diagnostic and then what their strategic priorities are, and then create a roadmap. And that roadmap will pull from each of these different areas to sort of sequence in the way that's going to make the biggest impact on their business and deliver the strongest ROI for them.
Interesting. This idea of strategy is really, really important, but obviously you need kind of execution as well to make sure that the strategies actually live to. And obviously there are strategic components which you deliver, things like the frameworks, the playbook, sales process, sales comp, and then you've got operational components like the sellers, but also getting the tech set up and getting the lead generation set up. What do you do when there are gaps, operational gaps, where your strategy can't necessarily be delivered?
So you raise an excellent point, and I really sort of had an awakening when I realized that the classic training in marketing is go off and do strategy and then come back and then execute on that strategy. But what I have seen so often is that the strategists will go off in their ivory tower and they'll stroke their goatee for 6 months debating this color blue or that color blue or this phrase or that phrase. And then they come back and they put it into the market and there's no response to it. And so they sort of immediately need to pivot. And so one of the ways that we've adapted that is to sort of build strategy simultaneously with execution. partly because that starts to reveal gaps in their current execution capability, so that we can find those operational gaps and kind of fix them as we go, as well as enhance other, a more robust sales system, which might be an initiative all on its own, but we oftentimes will try to, do a jumpstart initiative of, let's reach out to all of our existing customers and talk about what our latest research or something else, and try to really understand where they are in their process of renewal or expansion. Just doing a simple exercise like that starts to reveal lots of cracks in their infrastructure and system. At the same time, though, an existing client database is often the most underutilized resource that companies are sitting on that they're not doing anything with. And so by having what seems like a discrete initiative there, it reveals gaps in strategy of, well, we don't really know what to say because we don't know how we're different than the rest of the marketplace. And it reveals gaps in operations of, well, we don't really have all of their contact info in a way that we can segment it in a way that makes sense. Or, we don't have the mechanism for sending messages to the folks that we want to talk to. So or we don't have the mechanism for capturing those leads, getting them into a sales conversation with the right people. Like all of those sort of strategic and operational issues start to present themselves when done as part of a jumpstart initiative. But instead of just sort of plowing through and being like, oh, well, we make the best with what we've got, we make note of where there are strategic and operational gaps so that we can then prioritize those to fix as part of the ongoing engagement.
Interesting. Well, one of the biggest operational gaps that often shows up, and this is actually the work that we do a lot with fractional CROs, is they come in, tell us about the strategy, and then our big problem is outbound systems and lead generation, and
That's
can you
right.
help us build these out? This is where we kind of come in a lot. What do your sort of solutions look like for that when clients are missing kind of outbound systems? Do you kind of help them build it internally, upskill the team? Do you kind of bring in other partners? What does that typically look like?
Yeah, so it varies. And oftentimes I try to meet them where they are, because too much change at once is just too much. And so oftentimes, like if they've got a system that's only slightly broken, well, then let's try to fix that and enhance it in some way. Maybe they've got the mechanism for sending messages, they just don't know what to say in those messages, and so it's not resonating. They don't have a good offer. They don't have a good sort of messaging strategy there. Or they might be working with some existing agency that, sure, could we do a search for other agencies? Yeah, but that's oftentimes a long and laborious process, which is going to slow down their success on everything else. Let's not do that either. And so we oftentimes will kind of meet them where they are, but oftentimes they just have a gap there. And so we definitely do work with folks like you to come in and really solve that piece. One of the things that we see that's so often amiss is that companies don't define that as part of what a mature, comprehensive system looks like. They think, well, we come up with our messaging and then we go out and we buy ads and then we sell them once they come in, but they don't recognize that there's actually a whole real sort of demand capture, lead generation piece that needs to be an explicit part of their process, or they're going to fall down when it comes time to activate.
Can you explain that last piece? What do you mean by that specifically? If it falls down, can you dive a bit more into that?
Yeah, for sure. So we very frequently will see companies that will run media campaigns that might even have some kind of lead capture mechanism as part of it, but there's then no clear scoring, prioritization, sort of routing system to then get it to the right sales conversation as quickly as possible, or really on the right cadence, because maybe they need to be nurtured a little longer before they move into the sales cycle. And so they'll run the campaign. If the person isn't ready to buy today, they essentially never do anything with that lead again. It goes into some abyss database, and they don't do anything with it. Likewise, we see folks that are out there just sort of having knife fights trying to have individual conversations with folks without leveraging automation tools or other mechanisms to do it at scale. And so they aren't able to, sort of get the traction that they need in order for their sales process to be successful. What we see is the most successful is when there's a coordination at this nexus point. The transition between marketing to sales, and between those attraction systems and those acceleration systems, where all their media that they might be spending money on is being enhanced because there is outreach at scale that is then sort of playing on that media. But instead of it just being a sort of blunt instrument sales message, it's reflecting the marketing positioning that they're putting into the market, and has a strategy for opening doors with the 95% of the market that's not in market at any given time, while at the same time, opening conversations with the 5% that is in market. And when it's done really well, part of a strategic approach, but built on a process, it also moves what I call the movable middle, that 10 to 15% of the market. Yeah, that 10 to 15% of the market that they haven't actively decided to go in market yet. They're not actively searching, but this is a priority, and you've now moved it from priority 8 to priority 3, and it's something that they're going to solve in the next 6 months. And if you've done that artfully, instead of just being one of the providers they call, you are the only one of the providers they call, because you successfully educated them to move that middle from out of market to in market.
Interesting. I think that's a very clear and interesting example around how efforts can often, activity doesn't actually lead to ROI, and specifically in the case of marketing campaigns, it can be very difficult to actually attribute a clear ROI to those efforts. Do you have any examples of when you've worked hand in hand operationally with another partner to kind of deliver both the strategic and the operational components, whether it was lead generation, rev ops, and sync that to your strategic element, which is sales process, sales strategy, playbook, etc.?
So you hit on something that's so important and so worth double clicking. So we work a lot with companies that are heading into a time of scrutiny, I call it. And so that could be like a founder exit, like there's some transition as the founder exits and new leadership comes in, an investment round or M&A activity, where they need more than just top line revenue. They actually need to show that they can stand up to scrutiny, like a quality of earnings report, where a CFO or some other financial analyst is really going to get in and say, not just do you have earnings and do your bank accounts match your sort of other accounts, but do you actually have a system for creating those earnings? Because that level of scrutiny is happening more and more, even in the lower middle market, as private equity has made larger investments in the lower middle market. They've brought that standard of analysis in. And one of the things that we see is lower revenue, but that's connected to systems, makes a more valuable enterprise than higher top line revenue. And one of the ways that we see people, sort of get at that high top line revenue, but without a connection to systems, is they do what I call, sort of tactic stacking, where, well, we want to try this. So, let's hire some people so that we can try this tactic. And it generates some, volume. And then they, run that through the process. And now they want to try this other tactic. So they hire some more people to run that tactic for them. And then, that brings in some volume. But all of these things are sort of, marching up, not creating a curve of really exponential impact, because it doesn't really scale. And I like to say, like, if your revenues grow, but only linearly with your hires, you're not really scaling, you're just stretching. And unfortunately, every time you add that new tactic, you create complexity that creates strain within your organization, which may not be obvious, but absolutely exists, because it creates a lack of focus. It creates competing resources, competing points of view within the room. And so very often we see companies stack those tactics, then realize, oh, this isn't scaling, where our costs are rising just as fast as our revenues are. So then they fire half the people, but they want to maintain all the tactics. then they just burn everyone out. They try to put everyone in hustle mode. And that just doesn't work. That doesn't scale. And so the way that we try to connect those processes to a strategic approach is rather than chasing shiny objects, we take a strategic approach to the marketplace and say, what is likely to be our best go-to-market motion, given the length of sales cycle, the size of the engagements that we have, what the customer buying committee looks like, what the competitive landscape looks like. Now, let's make a strategic bet on one particular go-to-market motion and one particular process that we can really master. Because the other thing that happens is when you master a go-to-market process, that actually creates competitive sort of differentiation and protection. You have a moat and a wall because you figured it out in a way that other people haven't. Whereas if you're just mediocre at 5 tactics, you can grow. But if you become excellent in one, that's when you can stomp on the gas and really accelerate your growth and experience the results that people are looking for. And it's that linkage between building a process that's founded in a strategic approach that it's what creates the success that really allows companies to break through those roadblocks at 5 million, 10 million, 25 million.
That's a very astute observation you shared there, Mark. This idea that you've got to create systems which compound. It's not just about putting something in place, letting it run, and then letting your revenue grow linearly, but actually creating something that's going to lead to that J-curve effect, as you talked about. And then you kind of mentioned at the end there this idea of kind of go-to-market systems. How would companies actually create a go-to-market system where the systems actually are enabling scaling as opposed to linear growth? And how do they ensure that that's connected to a solid strategy that you or someone else has built out?
Sure. If it was simple, I mean, if it was easy, everyone would do it. So,
Yeah.
some of it is now you need to have a process for getting there. And that process starts with, kind of diagnosing, where you are today, designing the system that's going to work best in your given context, and then deploying that so that you can then optimize it. So that kind of growth trajectory tends to work. But the other thing that we see is a really good framework is thinking, the classic, and this has been around since the 70s with, sort of digital transformation of, it's people, process, technology, that triangle of success. And that order really matters. And I sort of go a step further and say the people are the strategy. Because today humans are better at sort of strategic inferences and connecting dots than most machines are, and so you want the people that can guide the strategy, and then you build a process around that, and then you find the technology that makes that process work better at achieving those strategic objectives. And the problem that I see today so frequently is people are like, here's a new technology. Let's figure out how it can help us, rather than starting with the strategy designed by people and then the process. And to give a very practical example, there are companies in the SaaS space all the time that are like, we want a product-led growth approach, but strategically they sell a really high-touch solution that the marketplace delivers with sort of white glove service. And so you really should be using more of an account-based marketing approach than a product-led marketing approach. And you really can't do both, not well, because they conflict with each other. And so all the time, I'll see companies that are like, so we tried product-led growth for 90 days and that didn't really work. And so then we tried hiring some account executives and have them go out and troll the floors at conferences, and that didn't really work. And the reason is because we avoided account-based marketing, although we kind of thought it was probably going to be the one that would work best. It just seemed like the most expensive to try. Well, you just lost 6 months of success and the how much money you spent on building out your product-led marketing and how much money you spent on hiring these AEs to go troll the floors at conferences. If you had started with the strategic right approach, account-based marketing, you'd be 6 months ahead and have all that savings. from the money you wasted on sort of those non-strategic approaches to the marketplace.
Interesting. It's a fantastic point because I think organizations often are afraid to make those big decisions, which are quite expensive, and it's tough to just accept the reality that right away, before you've actually made any mistakes, that the ABM play is probably the best, especially if you've got a high touch service. How do you nip those issues in the bud early and then prevent organizations making those mistakes early on?
And be the adult in the room. Fundamentally, we're not inventing rocket surgery. There are hundreds of years of research into how humans make decisions, and lots of research on how they make different types of decisions, complex versus simple, and that are related to this versus that. And so, by studying those things, that's what guides the strategic decision making on, okay, of the 5 ways we could do this, what's the right way, given our context? Well, chances are it's going to be this, because if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, and so that saves you from, just sort of wishful thinking and hoping that it's going to be something that might be simpler or might be cheaper or worked for your buddy down at the golf club. Because every business is operating its own context. And so by really understanding that context, you can make those strategic choices that then guide the building of a process that's ultimately going to be successful.
Interesting. So yeah, it's a fascinating, some fascinating decisions there, and we see with a lot of our clients, there's a lot of, they sort of bring us on a lead generation perspective, and they kind of say we want to do this and this, and then we think, there's probably a strategic gap missing here. We probably work with them to kind of define this motion
That's
a
right.
bit more. I want to focus more on this idea of kind of pipeline quality and this idea of the founder and CEO mindset underpinning that, because I think that links quite closely to what we're talking about now. When a CEO says, we need more pipeline, what question should they be asking instead, in your perspective?
Yeah, so let's give a little bit of a sort of strategic framework. There's only so many hours in the day. You only have so much time. If you get 100 leads, and the law of oligarchy that 20% of them are likely to wind up representing 80% of your revenues, you actually only close about half your leads. So that means that really 10% of your leads are likely to generate 80% of your revenues. If you treat those 100 leads the same, which when you're making a volume play, you generally do, because you're generally trying to build systems that can handle it at scale, and sort of approaching it that way, you're peanut butter spreading your resources across all 100. Your competitors that are doing a better job of identifying those 10 that have the potential to generate 80% of their revenue, and then putting 80% of those resources on 10, and you're only putting 1% of your resources against each of those 10, whereas they're splitting that 80 between those 10. That, are you going to win? No. Like, they will do a better job of selling the prospect by doing a better job of understanding their needs on a deep basis, doing a better job of connecting their solution to those needs on a deep basis, doing a better job of building rapport across the buying committee, doing a better job of providing the right content that can accelerate that decision-making cycle and really support decision-making. Of course, they're going to win. So when they win those best deals, you're just left with their scraps. And here's what's wrong with their scraps. Even if you're winning a volume of them, those worst customers, they never really believed in your product or buying vision, because they're kind of just sort of bad customers in the category. And so they're going to grind you down on margin, on your price. And so you'll never be able to reinvest in your product in order to make it better. They never believed in the product that you're building and what you're building it for. So they're going to ask you to customize it to them. So you're not building what the marketplace wants. You're building what this one customer wants. That pulls you even further behind your competition. And then finally, they're likely to churn without ever providing you enough margin you could reinvest, or advocacy in the marketplace that you can, really do a good job with. And so that just burns out your team. And I've seen this all the time. That creates a death spiral that's slow and painful because you are closing deals. You're just closing the worst deals in the marketplace. And then those worst deals are killing you slowly. Now compare that to your competitor who did a good job of identifying the best opportunities, put the resources on to win those best opportunities. Those folks believe in their product vision. So they're happy to pay a margin because they know you're reinvesting in making the product better. They're aligned with the results that you're delivering. And so they're excited about your product roadmap that's going to speak to the marketplace. In fact, they'll get up on stage with you and advocate for the way that you're solving the problem. What looks like the same deal, if you're chasing volume, is dramatically different in the outcomes it delivers for your business. And so rather than looking for more prospects, you should really be looking for, how do I build the systems that allow me to attract the right ones and then identify them quickly and then put the best resources against them so that I win them. And that's the key that works so much better than, and also, the S-shaped curve of acquisition costs. Doubling the volume is so much more expensive than doubling your success rate with the ones that you've got. So rather than thinking about how do we get more volume, think about how you do a better job with the ones that you've got by identifying the best, prioritizing them, by nurturing those that aren't quite ready in different ways, by educating them and shaping their buying criteria so that they believe in where your product is going before they ever sign, before they ever sign a contract with you. Those are the activities that can double your throughput, and so you wind up doubling revenues without doubling your volume.
Interesting. There's some fascinating insights there, which are almost seem very straightforward there. Ideal customer profile. This is kind of what we're talking about now. I'd love to understand, and I've got a bit of an example here of a client that we're working with. They're a client in the services space. They serve a bunch of different industries. They've kind of stayed industry agnostic, and we've asked them if they want to narrow down their ICP. They're like, no, let's stay relatively broad because they can serve a lot of different people. They're hovering about $1 million in revenue. And they're continuously going after, they've defined their ICP in terms of broad business terms. Things like the ACV of their customer, things like the total addressable market of their customer, things like what types of services they sell. But I was wondering, for that type of client, is it best to actually narrow down and focus on a specific sub-vertical? Or is it best to kind of keep the market broad and actually serve a variety of people? What do you think about that?
So what is likely to happen? I'm not psychic, but I can see the future. They're going to bounce along at that $1 million range until they do a better job of drilling in on a particular customer. Now, a rising tide raises all ships. So if they happen to be in a category that's growing 20% year on year on year, sure, they might get up to that 5 million, and then they'll bounce along for several years and they won't be able to break into the 10 million range. Now, the only way to do it isn't niching down to a subcategory. And in fact, I prefer, and what I think is a more strategic approach, is to incorporate some concepts from the idea of kind of blue ocean strategy as well as category design, where we think about, it's not about niching down to a super small segment. We still need a total addressable market or a TAM that allows us to achieve
Big enough,
goal.
right? Yeah.
Instead, it's about redefining the boundaries of the marketplace, not based on firmographics, like the services they offer or the industries that they're in or the size of the company, but instead the need that drives them to go to market. And then when they evaluate all the options in the market, why do they consistently choose you? What is it about their context that makes you the perfect fit? And does that represent a gap in the way that the competition is defining the marketplace today? Probably. That's why they're winning. That's why they got to $1 million. And if they enunciate that gap really clearly to the rest of the market, they'll expand the boundaries of that specific point of view, of that specific marketplace. So they are niching down, but not by, well, we only serve this vertical, because if they are solving a problem that is transferable across verticals and even potentially across companies of a certain size, and instead we are for companies that believe this point of view, and believe that this is what's wrong with the status quo. And that's how we've built something that's unique in the marketplace that allows them to focus on a particular marketplace in a way that will allow them to break through and really accelerate that revenue growth. But that's a more strategic approach to segmentation than just looking at firmographics. And oftentimes it's the business context. So let's use a very dumb but simple example. Someone they need a CRM. Okay, there's a million options out there. Do they need a CRM because they're growing so fast they have to keep track of their customers? Or do they need a CRM because their market is shrinking and they got to do more with the customers they've got? Those are two different business contexts. And I'm certain that if you compared 10 different CRMs, some of them would excel at this business context and some of them would excel at this business context. And so by refining their positioning and their real category design to go after the context that they address best, that's where they'll find their real breakthrough growth.
Interesting. Because I think when we talk about ICP and narrowing it down, so many people talk about it in terms of choosing your niche or your niche with the American accent, I think you'd say, choosing a specific subvertical. I don't know whether it's like plumbers in South Carolina, nailing on that. We're just going to focus these people and crush it for these people. Whereas what you're saying is different. So say you're a plumber in Carolina, instead of saying, oh, we just solve your plumbing needs, we solve, and where we believe that most plumbing jobs aren't done effectively and that you should have quality service every time you're done with a plumbing job. I'm just creating a silly example.
Sure.
Is that why is much different for you than saying niching down on that why is better than niching down on the plumbers in South Carolina? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Partly because you make choices every day about how you build your business, and that why is what guides those choices. Otherwise, you wander in a sea of sameness and you invite comparison. What you always want to do is invite a choice, where they're choosing this point of view versus that point of view. Because when you get to chasing those best customers, they're going to have options, all of which have great case studies, all of which have effective, strong ROI on their pricing. Or at least they can show that, the case studies of them, all of which have marquee logos on there. So then why do they pick you versus the other? It needs to not be well, we're better or we're faster or we're cheaper, because you can't really tell better from the outside. And you can't tell faster until after you've bought it and then they weren't slow. And cheaper, no one wants to compete there. Instead, it's, well, you choose us because we have a point of view about the right way to do this in the marketplace. And that's the key differentiation. And so by defining that point of view, that allows you to redraw the boundaries of the marketplace, not on sort of ham-fisted firmographics like companies of this size or of this, but companies that have this belief. Now, when it comes to tactical targeting, it is hard to find folks that signal certain beliefs, but you can, sort of do that by resonating with the messaging that you're using. And so you might have some firmographics that allow you to execute targeting, but then some of that context that is what guides your messaging, which then determines who's going to raise their hand. But now you're getting a higher percentage of folks raising their hand that you're likely to win. And so your resources are better allocated there. They wind up being those customers that partner with you and grow your business rather than
Yeah.
those that never believe and grind you down, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow. That's actually a very unique insight I've never heard on this podcast. So thank you for
Oh,
sharing that, Mark. So
my
just
pleasure.
kind of last question. I want to kind of drill this down a bit further. If defining that and thinking, finding, as you say, people who agree with that philosophy that you have is quite challenging. So is the option then to start with the firmographic components, like the plumbers in Carolina or the plumbers in the Midwest, to reach out to them and then on a discovery call tell them, hey, our philosophy is that we believe every great plumbing job should be accompanied with great service, and then kind of see their reaction to that, and then decide whether or not they're an ICP or not. Like, how do you kind of marry firmographic components with the attachment to this philosophical positioning?
So oftentimes you can mine data to find that philosophical positioning. Particularly if you're going after larger companies that might be making press releases, or their CEO might be talking about their strategic priorities for the year on LinkedIn or Twitter, or you might know that the private equity that backs them is the same private equity that backs these other companies, and they have an investment thesis that they use to back those companies. So you can find some of those things. Is it as easy as going to LinkedIn Sales Navigator and typing in this size? No, it's not. It requires a little more work, but the payoff is there. So that's step one, is to think about how to find those unique data points. Oftentimes, it doesn't start by defining a firmographic. It starts by, let's look at who your best customers are, and then go beyond defining the firmographics, but talk about what brought them to you. What was the context they were operating in? What is the thing that's unique about them that makes them your best customer? And then, is there a data point we could use to infer that? And then, finally, you can use messaging to start to filter. But usually it's not get on the phone and see if it resonates. It's more, as you're making that outreach to try to get them on the phone, you're putting this point of view out in the marketplace, and they've got a million options. They're going to call the one that resonates with them.
Hmm.
And so
It,
that,
it,
yeah.
do you think it's also linked to like a brand thing and like an attachment to the founder and the mindset there of, you can speak to so many different market agencies or plumbing companies, but I guess if one guy, you just like the founder, you like the way they articulate ideas, that could even be the way you differentiate yourself. What do you think about that?
Yes, and the founder's brand is almost always part of this designed category early on. But there's a phrase that a sign of intelligence is strong ideas held loosely. I've known many founders that were like, well, we built the product this way because of reasons A, B, C, D, E, and F. Well, A, B, and C align pretty well with one point of view, and D, E, and F align with another point of view. And so if you choose A, B, and C to be that category design, that positioning, that messaging that you're putting out into the marketplace, the founder just stops talking about D, E, and F as why he built
Mm.
it, because the audience only has so much bandwidth. And so then by focusing on the A, B, and C that are aligned with this category point of view, that are aligned with the positioning strategy you're putting out in the marketplace, the founder's reinforcing that as part of building their brand.
Interesting. Wow. Well, Mark, thank you very much for those insights. And we could go, but we could talk about this all day. But I'm afraid our viewers have other things to do. Mark, we'd
Sure.
love to, as we wrap up today, coming on the concluding part of our episode. What is the kind of one kind of go-to-market strategic bit of advice you might give to an SMB or mid-market business who is struggling and hovering at that $1 million range and is looking to jack that up? What is that one thing you would say to them?
So, this book is sort of specifically designed for folks in that kind of getting up to a million and trying to break through that roadblock. And it's designed as a primer that not only uses the synthesis that I've gained over 25 years, but also the latest best practices of strategic and process-driven approach. And there's a free copy of this book available for anyone listening at modernrevenuestrategies.com/free download. If you go there, you'll get a free copy, and that's really what it's designed to do. But the main thing that I would say is strategy, process, technology. It start with what's really the strategic approach that is going to break through and cut through. Now then, how do we build processes that ensure that that strategy is embedded within the organization? And then let's layer in some technology that makes those processes run better, faster, stronger, and without mistakes. And so that mindset is really the key to success. The other sort of anecdote is when you're making these processes, write them down. So often folks keep them between their ears. Even if you've got, the world's greatest marketer on your team and you're the product guy over here, you should write down your product roadmap and they should write down their, sort of marketing process that they think is going to work, because now you can put them up on the wall and both of you can stand shoulder to shoulder and help each other improve those processes. And it's not me criticizing your idea. When it's between your ears, it kind of feels like me criticizing your idea. But when it's written down and up on the wall, then it's us working together to make our business better.
Wow. Well, Mark, thank you so much for your time today. A really fantastic discussion around SMB and mid-market growth, ICP, which we dived a lot in, and then also a quick plug about your book. Mark, you obviously shared, your book, and really, really interesting and kind of you to be able to share that so your audience can access it. Where else can we kind of find and learn more about the kind of work that you're doing?
Sure. So the book is at modernrevenuestrategies.com/free download. But the rest of the site gives you some of our category point of view, some of our approach to helping companies grow and scale, which is not about hustle mode. It's not about stacking tactics. It's about building that strategic approach and that process. It's not about heroes and really sort of relying on one person to carry the day, but building the processes that make the entire team work well. And we're also big believers in no arts and crafts. All marketing and sales should be tied to business outcomes, so that we're not sitting off in that ivory tower stroking our goatee for months debating this color blue or that color blue. We're actually building things that impact the business. And you can read more about our POV and approach to the marketplace there.
Awesome. Well, Mark, thank you so much for your time and for a brilliant discussion.
All right. Thank you, Ben.
Cheers.